The Devil's Hour, a horror sleep story. Part 1, the first shift. He woke at 3:33 a.m. There was no reason for it, no nightmare, no sound from outside, no restless tossing. Just the slow slide of his eyelids opening into the darkness of his bedroom. He could see the red glow of the digital clock on his bedside table, the numbers sharp as cut glass. 3:33. The house was silent. For a long moment, he thought he had simply woken early. But then the stillness pressed on him. It wasn't the normal silence of a house at night, with the faint hum of pipes, the creak of cooling wood, or the distant shuffle of wind. This silence felt absolute, as if the world itself had been paused. And then he noticed the smell. The air no longer carried the faint scent of his sheets or the dusty warmth of his radiator. Instead, it smelled of damp stone, of smoke, of something old. The room around him shifted before his eyes, not in a sudden flash, but slowly, as though time itself were peeling away like wet wallpaper. The familiar walls of his bedroom faded. In their place rose rough stone, dark and uneven, glistening with condensation. The warmth of his blankets vanished, replaced by a cold draft that crept into his bones. The red glow of his bedside clock became a lantern flame, guttering weakly, its smoke curling upward to a ceiling lost in shadow. He sat up, his breath clouding in the frigid air. The bed was gone. He was seated on a pallet of straw, the strands prickling his skin. This had to be a dream. It felt like a dream, but everything was sharp, too sharp. The stone beneath his feet bit into his soles. The air stank of mildew. He reached up, rubbing his fingers across his face, and even his stubble felt different, coarser somehow. He stood. The straw crunched beneath him. The lantern revealed a corridor, narrow, the walls sweating with damp. He heard a distant drip of water echo through the space, irregular, but steady enough to count. Drip, drip, drip. He whispered, "Hello." But his voice came back to him in warped echoes, too loud for the tiny space. And then, just as slowly as it had shifted before, the world folded back. The stones bled into plaster. The straw melted into his mattress. The lantern flickered into the red glow of the clock. He was back in bed, in his room. The numbers still read 3:33 a.m. He lay back down, pressing his hands against the sheets, clutching them as if to reassure himself they were real. The fabric felt rougher than he remembered. Maybe he was still half dreaming. Maybe he had sleepwalked or hallucinated. He told himself that and tried to believe it. Eventually, exhaustion dragged him back under. When morning came, he noticed something strange. He poured himself coffee, staring at the mug as though it would steady him. But when he tried to think back to his work schedule for the day, he couldn't remember. Not just the details, he couldn't even recall what he did for a living. The knowledge hovered just out of reach, like a word on the tip of his tongue. He opened his laptop, Hopping the familiar screens would jog something loose, but the folders, the files, the very programs he had installed looked unfamiliar. His own desktop background, a picture he was sure had once been of the coast, was now blank gray. He tried calling a friend, but when he scrolled through his contacts, the names blurred together. He couldn't pick one. They all felt like strangers. Still, he brushed it off. He hadn't slept well, that was all. A restless night, a vivid dream, the mind playing tricks. He forced himself through the day. By evening, the oddness had dulled, though the unease still lingered. He convinced himself it would be gone by tomorrow. That night, he fell asleep quickly, and once again, he woke at 3:33 a.m. The silence hit him first, the same absolute quiet that felt more like suffocation than peace. Then came the smell, damp, sharp, foreign. This time the change came faster. His bed dissolved beneath him. The ceiling above stretched high wooden beams blackened with soot. The window by his bedside vanished, replaced by narrow slits that let in no light at all. He was in another place, another time. The floor was dirt, packed hard, and his feet sank into it. He looked around wildly, heart hammering, but the small chamber was empty. A single iron candlestick sputtered in one corner. Its flame bent and straightened as if reacting to a breath he couldn't feel. He walked to the slit window, peering out, and his stomach lurched. Beyond the stone wall stretched fields, dark and endless, broken only by the faint glow of distant torches. He heard voices faintly carried on the wind, low chants, foreign words he didn't recognize. Panic gripped him. He pressed his back to the wall, fists clenched, every nerve screaming. And then again he was back. His room solidified around him. The hum of his radiator returned. The red digits of the clock glared. 3:33 a.m. He wanted to scream, but his throat was dry. He turned on the bedside lamp with shaking fingers. When he looked at the framed photo on his nightstand, his blood froze. It was a picture of him and two other people smiling, arms around each other. He recognized his own face, but the others were strangers. He had no memory of them at all. And worse, he couldn't remember who should have been there. The present was beginning to slip. Part 2, the child in the past. The second night, he didn't bother setting an alarm. He already knew what hour would come for him. He fell asleep uneasy, blankets pulled tight, his bedside lamp left glowing, as if light alone could anchor him to the present. But the moment his eyes closed, time betrayed him. He surfaced into consciousness without warning, as if yanked upward from black water. The digits on the clock were merciless. 3:33 a.m. The silence was waiting for him, heavy as stone. The lamp's glow wavered, bent, thinned, then tore away entirely. The air turned stale, damp, and then gone. His room peeled away like a stage backdrop. This time, when the new place solidified, he was outside. The air was cool and clean, filled with the smell of cut grass and wet earth. Crickets sang their rhythm into the night, and the moon was higher than it had been when he'd gone to bed. He stood barefoot on soft grass, the blades slick with dew. A dirt road stretched before him, uneven ruts pressed deep by wooden cartwheels. He knew this place. It was his old neighborhood, not as it was now, but as it had been when he was a child, before the new houses, before the supermarket, before everything modern swallowed it whole. The road ran narrow, lined with hedges, and at the far end stood the house he'd grown up in. A smaller shape, painted in the memory of another decade. His throat tightened. Someone was standing outside that house. It was a boy, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, with a stick in hand, poking at the dirt. The boy hummed tunelessly to himself, his hair a little too long, his face half hidden by the shadows. The man's knees went weak when recognition struck. He knew that child. He had seen photographs, glimpsed the reflection in family albums that now felt like they belonged to someone else. It was him, his younger self. The boy dropped the stick. Slowly, carefully, he lifted his head, and he looked straight at him. The man's heart stopped. He wasn't standing across the street, not hidden in shadow. He was close, too close. The child's gaze was direct, unwavering, like he had been waiting. The boy's lips parted. "You're not supposed to be here." The voice was small, high, but laced with a strange certainty, as though rehearsed. The man staggered back, tripping on the uneven grass. He gasped to speak, but the words tangled in his throat. The boy stepped forward, tilting his head, the moonlight catching his eyes. They were dark, too dark. The world folded again. Grass vanished beneath him, the air drained of crickets. The house dissolved into plaster and paint. He fell backward into his bed with a gasp, his sheets damp with sweat. His lamp was still on, his clock still ticking, merciless and red. 3:34 a.m. He pressed both hands against his face, but the tremor running through him didn't fade. Sleep refused him after that. He sat awake until dawn, watching the first light crawl over his curtains. When he finally rose, his body was heavy, his mind fogged. He staggered to the kitchen, trying to piece himself together with caffeine, but the edges of his thoughts kept slipping. He tried to remember his parents. He knew he'd grown up in that house, had seen the boy who was himself outside it. But when he reached for the memories, they slid away. He could not recall the sound of his father's laugh, could not recall the color of his mother's eyes. He stood there, mug in hand, staring out the kitchen window until the coffee cooled in his grip. By the end of the day, more was missing. His favorite restaurant, what was it called? He couldn't picture the sign, the menu, the people who worked there. His bank card pin gone. The more he tried to hold onto the details, the more they dissolved, like ink bleeding into water. That night, he didn't even fight it. He lay in bed, body rigid, waiting. When he surfaced again, it was no surprise to see the clock, 3:33 a.m. The silence pressed down. The room peeled. He stood in a dusty parlor, light from an oil lamp staining the walls in golden haze. Cobwebs draped across shelves, heavy with books. A hearth glowed faintly with dying coals. On the mantel sat a clock. Its hands ticked forward, soundless but precise, as though marking something other than time. And from the corner, he saw movement. The boy again, his younger self, sitting cross-legged on the rug, watching the clock, lips moving as if whispering to it. The man's stomach clenched. He forced a whisper. "What are you?" The boy turned, smiling faintly, lips pale in the lamplight. "I'm what you leave behind." And then the room collapsed, hurling him back into bed. He awoke screaming, though he didn't remember what had left his throat. He clutched at the photo on his nightstand, but this time the picture had changed again. The strangers' faces were still there. His own was gone. Part 3, Stranger Centuries. By the third night, he no longer thought of it as a dream. Dreams blurred, dissolved, scattered into fragments by morning. But these nights lingered sharp as broken glass. He could still feel the dew on his skin from the old road, still hear the boy's whisper echoing in his ears. He stayed awake as long as he could, but exhaustion won. And when the numbers on the clock turned cruel again, 3:33 a.m., the silence swept him away. This time, the air reeked of smoke. He blinked into a street lit by torches, not lamps. The buildings hunched close together, timber framed with sagging thatch roofs. The road beneath him was mud, churned with filth. People moved slowly through the haze, figures cloaked in ragged cloth, faces hidden. Bells rang in the distance, solemn and heavy. A figure stumbled past him, coughing wetly into a bundle of rags. When the man pulled his hand away, it was slick with blackened blood. The traveler's stomach lurched. He knew this place, not the street, not the town, but the era. He had read about it once in a history book, the plague years. He tried to move, to retreat into shadow. But the people drifting through the fog moved around him without hesitation, without question, as if he were invisible. Then, from the corner of his eye, he saw it again. A clock, small, wooden, sitting strangely on a merchant's stall. Though the merchant was dead, collapsed face first on the table. The clock's hands ticked forward in silence, and next to it, half hidden in the mist, stood the boy. No, not a boy this time. Older. A teenager now, thin and pale, his face nearly the same as the child, but stretched, sharpened, the angles wrong. He stood motionless, staring. His lips curled in a faint smile that did not touch his eyes. The man's voice cracked. "Why are you here?" The teenager tilted his head, the gesture eerily familiar. "Because you are." The silence struck again. The world folded. He woke gasping in his bed. His sheets were damp. His lamp burned low. He scrambled to the photo on the nightstand and dropped it with a cry. All three faces were were strangers now. He clutched at his temples, trying to drag up the names of anyone, his friends, his family, his coworkers. But the harder he tried, the more the memories slipped, blurred, dissolved. Even his own surname felt like a foreign word. He stumbled into the kitchen, clutching the counter. His laptop sat open where he had left it. But the files meant nothing now, just strings of letters without meaning. His email login refused him, though he was certain he had typed the password correctly. The present was unraveling. That night, he considered not sleeping at all. He made coffee strong enough to hurt his stomach. He walked in circles through his house, packing like a caged animal. But exhaustion has claws, and it dragged him down in spite of himself. The clock was waiting. 3:33. This time, he woke to the sound of horses' hooves. He stood on a cobbled street beneath flickering gas lamps. Posters clung to the walls of brick buildings. Proclamations, advertisements, announcements of executions. The air stank of coal smoke, and the cries of street vendors echoed far off. But no one was close. The street was nearly empty. He turned a corner and stopped cold. A gallows stood in the square, silhouetted against the moon. A crowd murmured at its base, shadowy and faceless, their voices blending into one endless whisper. At the gallows, foot sat another clock, its hands jerking forward in uneven ticks, as if straining against some unseen pressure. And beneath it stood the teenager again. No, older still. A young man now. His hair hung longer, his jaw sharper, his smile crueler. The traveler's voice was a rasp. "What do you want from me?" The figure's eyes glinted in the torchlight. "Not from you, from what you were." The gallows creaked. A rope swayed, though no wind stirred. The silence shattered. His room returned. He gasped, clutching his sheets, heart pounding. His lamp was gone. The table it had rested on was gone too. In its place was bare carpet, gray and unyielding. The photo frame lay on the floor, cracked and empty. He sat with his head in his hands until dawn. When daylight finally seeped through his blinds, he found more missing. His kitchen cupboards were bare, though he had shopped days ago. His phone contained only a handful of contacts, all nameless numbers. His reflection in the bathroom mirror was blurred around the edges, as if the glass were fogged, though when he wiped it, the distortion stayed. The present was thinning. That night, when the clock dragged him away again, he didn't fight it. His body had surrendered, and his mind followed. He stood in ruins. Stone walls cracked open to the sky, vines choking what was left. The moon shone cold on broken statues and shattered altars, and there, by a fallen column, stood the boy once more, or perhaps the man he would become. The figure's age shifted with each blink, child, teen, adult, a blur of versions, all watching him. The figure lifted a hand and pointed toward the sky. The traveler followed the gesture and saw the pale outline of a clock face carved into the moon itself. Its hands crawled toward midnight. The figure whispered, voice overlapping with all its ages at once. "You can't stay here. You never could." And then the ruins vanished. He was back in his bed, gasping, clawing at the sheets. His clock ticked on. But this time, the numbers were wrong. It did not read 3:33. It read, Part 4, The Woman in the Clock. By now, the man no longer pretended the nights were dreams. He did not fight the pull. He did not tell himself he would wake safe in the morning. Each time he lay down, he understood. The present would dissolve, and something else would take its place. But this night was different. When the silence came, it carried a weight heavier than before. He waited for the world to peel away, for stone walls or plague streets or gallows to take shape. But instead, he remained in his bedroom. Almost, the air had gone stale. His walls seemed thinner, stretched like fabric. The floor dipped faintly beneath his bed, as though the house itself were sagging into emptiness. And then he saw her. She stood in the corner of the room, half hidden in shadow, pale as wax. A woman, tall, dressed in garments that were not modern, but not quite of any era he recognized either. Her hair hung long and black, spilling across her shoulders like ink. She did not move. She only stood there watching. The man forced out a whisper, though his throat was sandpaper. "Who are you?" The woman tilted her head slowly, unnervingly. And as she moved, he realized she was not standing in the corner at all. She was standing inside the clock. He stared, heart pounding. The clock on his nightstand ticked faintly, though it had never made a sound before, and her pale face was framed within its glass, like a reflection that did not belong to him. Her lips parted, though the tick-tick-tick drowned her words. He leaned closer. Her voice was soft, but it slid under his skin. "The present is the only place you cannot stay." The air shuddered. The walls tore away. He stood in another place, though her words still pulsed in his skull. This time, the world around him was half familiar. His childhood home. The living room, with its sagging sofa, the faded wallpaper, the little wooden table his parents had once owned. But the colors were wrong. Everything was desaturated, blurred, as if he were staring into a memory that had been left too long in sunlight. On the mantel above the fireplace sat a clock. Its pendulum swung slowly, each tick shaking the air. And seated on the sofa was the boy again, his younger self. No longer playing, no longer humming, just sitting, staring. The man's mouth opened, words trembling. "What are you doing here?" The boy didn't answer. His eyes flicked upward to the clock. The man followed the gaze. The pale woman was there again, her face dimly visible behind the glass. Watching, waiting. He staggered backward, heart hammering. "What do you want from me?" The woman did not answer. The boy did. "You're leaving pieces behind." The man swallowed hard. Pieces of what? The boy smiled, too wide for his face. "You." The walls folded, He crashed back into his bed, gasping. He scrambled upright, desperate to reassure himself that he was home, here in the present. But the room was wrong again. The lamp was missing. The photo frame was missing. The curtains hung crooked, as though they had been torn and stitched by clumsy hands. He tried to remember what his house should look like, but no image came. The present, slippery and fragile, was dissolving. He stumbled into the hallway, flicking light switches, but none responded. He ran his hands along the wall, desperate for some anchor, some familiar thing. His fingers brushed a doorknob, but when he pushed it open, it did not reveal his kitchen. It revealed stone steps, spiraling downward into dark. He slammed the door shut with a cry. The silence pressed harder. The house groaned, warped, shifting around him. Every door, every window led to something else: a forest at night, a ruined street, a desert of broken glass. He slammed them all closed, one after another, but each time the air grew thinner. He retreated to his bedroom, clutching the clock in his hands. Its ticking was louder now, merciless. Behind the glass, he thought he saw the faint curve of the woman's mouth. He tried to smash it. He hurled the clock against the wall. The glass cracked, the hands bent. For a moment, the ticking stopped. Relief surged through him. Then the silence deepened. The crack in the glass spread wider, splitting into jagged lines. From within, pale fingers pressed against the surface, stretching, straining, until they broke through entirely. Shards rained across the floor. The woman began to step out. The man stumbled backward, crashing against the bed. His throat was raw with panic, but no sound came. The woman leaned forward, half her body sliding free from the clock's face. Her hair spilled like liquid shadow, her eyes bottomless pits. She whispered again, closer now, her voice burrowing into his ears. "You do not belong here." And then the silence crushed him, and the world folded once more. He woke in ruins. This time, he did not remember how the present had felt. Part 5, The Ghost of Tomorrow. The air was ash. The man staggered forward, each breath pulling grit into his lungs. He lifted his hand to cover his mouth, but even that small act felt foreign, like the movement belonged to someone else's body. He was standing in a barren world. The sky was a bruised gray, cloudless but heavy, sagging over the land as though it had forgotten how to move. Buildings stretched around him, or the bones of buildings, their spines cracked, their walls hollowed. Steel beams jutted out at impossible angles, like ribs ripped from a carcass. Nothing lived, nothing stirred. The silence here was heavier than ever. He moved slowly, his legs stiff, as if the air itself resisted him. Dust clung to his clothes. The world was a cemetery without headstones. And then, among the ruins, he saw it. A figure sat against the wall of a collapsed building. It took him too long to recognize what he was looking at. A skeleton. Its clothing was rotted and brittle, barely more than threads clinging to bone. But in its lap, cradled as carefully as a treasure, was a broken watch. The hands were frozen at 3:33. The man's heart froze. He staggered closer, his breath shallow. The skeleton's position was too familiar. The way its hands curled around the watch, the tilt of the skull, the length of the bones. It was him. The man fell to his knees, choking on the dust. His eyes burned as he reached forward, trembling, desperate to deny it, to find some small difference, some error. But the watch was his. He recognized the crack in the glass, the worn strap. This was his ending. He jerked backward, crawling across the ground. His mind flooded with static, fragments of memory that didn't connect. Rooms that no longer existed, names he could no longer place, the pale woman's eyes. And then he felt it, a presence. He lifted his gaze and saw her standing at the end of the ruined street. The woman in the clock. She was no longer trapped behind glass. She was here, solid, her pale dress brushing the ash, her hair spilling like smoke across the ground. She was walking toward him. The man scrambled to his feet, stumbling backward. His legs threatened to collapse with every step, but he forced them on. He turned a corner, fleeing deeper into the ruins. The city stretched on endlessly, every alley filled with bones, every building sagging into dust. No matter where he turned, the streets bent inward, funneling him back toward her. He ducked into a shattered building, pressing himself against the wall. His breath came in ragged bursts. His mind screamed, "Wake up, wake up, wake up." But he no longer knew what waking meant. In the corner of the room stood a mirror, cracked but still intact. He caught his reflection in it and froze. The face that looked back was not his own. It was hollow, unfinished, as though someone had erased features with a damp cloth. The eyes were empty sockets. The skin blurred into fog at the edges. He lifted his hand, and the reflection lifted too. But the movements were delayed, mismatched, like the mirror was remembering him incorrectly. He tried to scream, but no sound came. Behind him, footsteps. He whirled. The woman stood in the doorway. She did not hurry. She did not need to. Her eyes held him, pinning him in place. Her voice slid across the walls, soft but absolute. "The present is gone." The man staggered toward the mirror, desperate to escape, desperate to find some fragment of self still tethered. He pressed his palms against the glass. It rippled under his touch like water. His reflection smiled, but he was not smiling. The reflection's blurred lips stretched wide, revealing teeth that were not teeth, but shards of broken clock hands, twisting and grinding in its mouth. Its head tilted, the sockets burning with something cold and endless. The man jerked his hands back, but it was too late. The reflection leaned forward, pressing its face against the inside of the glass, its teeth scraping against the surface. The sound was unbearable, like metal tearing into bone. Behind him, the woman stepped closer. He spun around, pressing himself against the mirror. His chest heaved, his vision blurred. He could not tell if the ash was outside or inside him anymore. She reached out a pale hand. Her fingers hovered inches from his skin, and then the silence shattered. He woke in his bed, gasping, but the room was almost empty now. The dresser gone, the lamp gone. Even the walls seemed thinner, eaten away at the edges. On the floor beside him lay a watch. His watch. The hands were frozen at 3:33. He could not remember what day it was, or what year, or if there was still such a thing as the present at all. Part 6. The Spiral of Forgetting. He woke, but waking no longer meant anything. The room that once held his life, his bed, his shelves, his photographs, was stripped bare. The wallpaper was peeling, curling away to reveal blackened plaster beneath. Even the ceiling sagged, as if time itself was gnawing through the house. The man clutched his head. Thoughts drifted in and out, slippery and half-formed. He tried to summon his mother's face, but all that came was a shadow. He tried to recall the name of his childhood street, but the letters tangled together in his mind, unreadable. Panic rose in him. He stumbled to the desk, the one piece of furniture that still remained. On it lay a notebook, or perhaps he had left it there earlier, though he could not remember when. He tore it open and began to write. "My name is..." The pen stuttered. His hand shook. The letters twisted as he put them down, looping into unfamiliar shapes. He tried again, pressing harder, but when he looked back at the page, the words were not words at all. They rearranged themselves before his eyes, spiraling across the paper like insects crawling into patterns he could not read. The man let out a ragged cry and hurled the notebook away. It struck the wall and fell open. The writing writhed, the ink shifting, the letters bending into symbols that seemed older than language. He squeezed his eyes shut. I am forgetting. I am unraveling. When he opened them, the notebook was gone. The silence deepened. He stumbled into the hallway. The walls stretched longer than they should, the floor tilting under his feet. Each door he passed was wrong. When he opened one, it led to a fog-soaked forest. Another opened into a hospital corridor, flickering with pale light. Another opened to nothing at all, a void where his stomach dropped as though gravity had been cut loose. He slammed them shut one after another, his breath coming fast. Then he heard it. Tick, tick, tick. The sound crawled down the hallway. He turned, and at the far end stood a clock on a pedestal, its pendulum swaying. The pale woman stood behind it, her hands resting lightly on the wood. She whispered, though the distance between them was impossible. You cannot hold yourself together. The man stumbled backward. Stay away from me. But the words faltered as he spoke. His voice came out fractured, the syllables breaking apart like shattered glass. He tried again, but the sounds had no meaning anymore. His tongue felt foreign, heavy. The woman tilted her head. Her expression was not cruelty nor mercy, only inevitability. The man ran. He fled down the hallway, but it no longer obeyed the shape of his house. It twisted, spiraled downward like a corkscrew. He descended, breath tearing from his throat, until the floor ended abruptly in a vast circular chamber. The walls were lined with clocks, hundreds of them. They ticked in uneven rhythms, some racing ahead, some slowing to silence. The air buzzed with their chaotic pulse. Each face showed a different hour, a different year, some with numbers that did not exist. And in the center of the chamber stood a chair. On the chair lay a bundle of papers, notebooks, scraps, torn diaries. He crept closer, trembling. Each one was his handwriting. Desperate attempts to anchor himself, to write who he was. But every page was corrupted. The words warped, bleeding into one another. Some pages contained nothing but spirals, drawn over and over until the paper was torn. Others held fragmented sentences. The woman inside the boy said, leaving pieces. I. He dropped the papers, his hands shaking. His head was splitting open with a pressure that felt older than time. The ticking grew louder. The woman stepped into the chamber. She was closer than ever now. Her face was pale, but her eyes were fathomless, swallowing every flicker of light. Her dress brushed the ground without sound, her presence filling the air with unbearable weight. He pressed his hands over his ears. Stop, please. But even those words were slipping. His mouth formed them, but what came out was nothing but static. The woman reached out her hand. Not a threat, not violence, an offering. You are unmoored, she whispered, and the present will not have you. He shook his head violently, tears burning his eyes. I don't know where I am. She stepped closer. Her shadow stretched, long and endless, swallowing the clocks one by one until their ticking faltered. The man's vision blurred. His thoughts twisted into knots. The last word he remembered clearly was now, but even that slipped away. He sank to his knees, clutching his skull, rocking back and forth as the chamber tilted, as the clocks melted from the walls. He was forgetting what it meant to exist at all. The pale woman knelt in front of him, her voice soft as a lullaby. Come, there are places for those who drift. And as she touched his hand, the last fragment of the present dissolved into silence. Part 7, the last present. He opened his eyes, but there was no relief in waking anymore. The world that surrounded him looked like home. Familiar streets stretched before him, the same cracked pavement, the same streetlights that once buzzed faintly on summer nights. A wind stirred, carrying the faint smell of rain. For a moment, he almost believed he had returned. Almost. But then he noticed the gaps. Houses that should have stood shoulder to shoulder were missing, replaced by yawning spaces of blank concrete. Street signs bore letters that shifted if he stared too long. The windows of the homes that remained were black, lifeless, as if no one had ever lived inside them. He stumbled forward, desperate to anchor himself. "This is it," he whispered. "This is the present. This has to be." But his voice wavered. Even as he said the words, he felt them thinning, like they didn't want to hold their shape. He reached his own street, or what was left of it. The houses leaned crookedly, their doors too narrow, their roofs sagging. He ran, his heart pounding, until he reached the place where his house should have been. There was nothing, no home, no walls, no sign that it had ever existed, just an empty lot overgrown with gray weeds. The man fell to his knees, gripping fistfuls of the brittle grass. His chest heaved, and he let out a sound that was half sob, half growl. His mind spun in circles, trying to conjure the shape of the house, the color of the door, the layout of the rooms. But nothing came. He could not remember what his own bedroom had looked like. He pressed his palms to his face, tears leaking between his fingers. "I've lost it, all of it." A voice spoke behind him. "You don't belong here." He froze. Slowly he turned. A woman stood at the edge of the lot, pale and still. The same one who had haunted him through centuries and ruins, the one who had whispered from the clock. Her black hair spilled down her shoulders, her eyes unfathomable. But she was not alone. The boy was there too. The child he had once been, sitting cross-legged on the weeds. His younger self looked up at him with hollow, knowing eyes. The man's stomach twisted. "Why are you here?" His words trembled. "This is mine. This is supposed to be my time." The boy tilted his head. His voice was soft, sing-song. "There is no yours, only places you borrow." The woman stepped closer. The ground did not crunch beneath her feet. She seemed weightless, unreal, and yet more real than anything else. Her gaze locked on him, pinning him to the earth. "The present was never yours," she whispered. "You drifted too long. You left too much behind." The man's breath came ragged. He shook his head violently, pressing his hands against his temples. "No, I'm still here. But the word faltered. "Here," what did that mean? The boy smiled, his teeth too sharp, his eyes too old. "You're not." The ground beneath the man rippled. The streetlights flickered, then bent sideways, their poles drooping like wax. The sky sagged lower, pressing down. Buildings dissolved at the edges, their outlines bleeding into static. The man tried to stand, but his legs gave out. He clawed at the weeds, desperate for something solid. His gaze flicked between the woman and the boy. "What are you?" he croaked. The woman's eyes glimmered faintly, like reflections in deep water, the keepers of what remains. The boy's voice overlapped hers, weaving through it like an echo. "And you have nothing left to keep." The man screamed, but the sound stretched thin, unraveling in the air until it dissolved into silence. He looked down at his hands. They were fatting. The edges of his fingers blurred, the skin paling into smoke. He could no longer feel the weeds beneath his palms. His body was unspooling, thread by thread. "No," he rasped. "Not yet, not yet." The woman reached her hand toward him again. He tried to recoil, but his body no longer obeyed. Her fingers brushed his cheek, and the world fractured. The street split like glass. The houses collapsed inward. The sky tore open, spilling a darkness deeper than night. And through it all, the boy's laughter rang out. Not the laughter of a child, but something vast and cruel, stretching across centuries. The man tried to cling to one last thought, one last word, anything that might tether him. But his mind was a ruin, his memories shards scattered in the wind. There was no present, only drift, and as the woman's hand closed over his, the last fragments of the street dissolved, and he was pulled into the endless current. Part 8, the endless drift. There was no waking this time, no gasp of breath, no frantic clawing at the bed sheets, no moment of false comfort. The present had abandoned him completely. He floated. The world around him was neither night nor day, but something between, a vast ocean of shadow without water, an endless expanse where time itself unraveled into threads of light. Moments flickered around him like dying stars. A child's laughter, a falling building, a face leaning close, a clock striking. Each glimmer appeared and vanished before he could grasp it. He reached out, trembling, desperate to hold onto one. But every memory dissolved in his fingers like ash. He drifted through centuries without stepping on ground. Once he glimpsed a battlefield, soldiers locked in a silent clash, their swords frozen mid-swing, their mouths open in cries that made no sound. He reached toward them, but the scene shattered into dust. Another time, he floated above a black ocean, the waves frozen mid-crash, the spray hanging in the air like shards of glass. A ship lay on its side, unmoving, its sails tattered and stiff. When he blinked, it was gone. The drift was endless, and he was not alone. Figures moved in the distance, drifting just as he did. Some he recognized faintly, faces he could not name, but knew he had once loved. Others were strangers, blurred silhouettes flickering in and out. They did not speak. They did not look at him. They were fragments, unmoored from their own presence, condemned to float forever. And always he saw her, the woman, pale, patient, eternal. She did not drift like the others. She walked, though there was no ground, her feet brushing the current of light as if it belonged to her. Wherever she went, the moments bent toward her, folding in obedience. Sometimes she was far away. Sometimes she was at his side. And sometimes she held his hand. Why me? His voice was thin, cracking, hardly more than a thought given shape. Why can't I stay? The woman looked at him with eyes that had never known the present. Because you were never here, she whispered. Her words struck him deeper than any blade. A cold certainty washed through him, and he realized she was right. He could not remember a single true moment of now. Every memory had already slipped by. Every dream of tomorrow was already gone. The present had only ever been a story he told himself, and now even that story had ended. The drift pulled him faster. Threads of light stretched, snapping into new forms. He passed through ages, the birth of a city, its collapse, the silence of centuries. He saw his own skeleton again, cradling the watch, and then he saw it turn to dust. He was being erased. His hands faded, his voice thinned to nothing. His body no longer obeyed him. He was thought without anchor, memory without owner. The boy appeared once more, sitting cross-legged in the current. His younger self, smiling with that too wide mouth. His voice was a child and an echo. "Pieces," the boy said. "You've left them all behind. Now there is nothing left but drift." The man wanted to fight, to scream, to beg for one last second of belonging, but the words would not come. Even his thoughts unraveled, scattering into the current like scraps of torn paper. The woman leaned close, her pale face filling the last of his vision. "Rest," she whispered. Her voice was both command and comfort. He wanted to resist, but he no longer remembered why. The threads of time pulled tighter, swirling into a vortex of silence and light. He felt himself stretch, thin, vanish. His last awareness was of her hand closing gently over his, and then he was gone. The drift continued. The clocks ticked on without him. The present, as always, belonged to someone else. Thank you for listening. Please like, share, and subscribe for more stories to fall asleep to.